Okay, so my talk is about games that are not quite games and how they vary and stuff like that. Maybe I should introduce myself first. I think I almost know everybody here, but my name is Rich. I play on Team Blood and Bones, and yeah, that's it. So the first reason why I'm giving this talk is because Linda suggested it, but I figured that wasn't a very good reason for why I should give a talk. So I came up with some good reasons. First of all, I thought if I talked about games that weren't games, I expected that most of the people here would be familiar with the overnight variety of the games. But I think that there aren't enough of those. I think we'd all agree with that. And I think with Curtis and Deanne leaving, we're going to be facing a real crisis. So, so when there aren't those kinds of games, there's other kinds of games that you can play and sort of get your fix. The other thing is that I think that these shorter games that I'm going to be mostly talking about are really important to our community for a number of reasons. One is that it's a great way to sort of get new players into the community because the people that are playing these short games might be the ones that run the longer ones in the future, so we can keep things going. And then training them. And then the other thing that I think we might be taking for granted is that I think that we have a really great benefit in our community where different people running different kinds of games of different styles and formats is really great because people can, with not a huge amount of effort, can come up with a great new idea to try in a short game that you don't want to invest an entire year in just to test out your new idea. So we have this sort of collaboration amongst the community to sort of learn new things. And you know, even as players, you see what other people try and you can incorporate them into your games. Nice. So why am I qualified to talk about this? Quick slide here. Huh? That's right. So my first game was in 2001, which is by some of the people in the back. That's not really that long ago, but since then, I've basically played in just about everything possible. The number is up to 69 events now, and I've hosted 5 events, and I know that there's a glaring omission there that you might be noticing. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, so how do games vary? There's tons of different things, and I think a lot of people realize this already, but I know that we have some newer people that are sort of getting a feel for what we have. Lots of things up here I think you can read. There's team size, there's what you do before the game, whether it's collaborative or competitive, or how hints are distributed, or sign-up methods, plots, themes, etc. I'm going to actually talk a little bit about how the different types of games vary on these different axes. So what's the common thread? Very good. The common thread. So here, let's have one suggestion on what the common thread is. Let's see how close it matches what I came up with.
Puzzles.
Well, okay. All right. Yes. Yeah, so I came up with team-based puzzle solving to achieve a goal, and that sort of leaves out some of the more fringe, solving a puzzle in a magazine or something is not quite what I'm talking about. So we'll keep going. And then I also think we have a bit of a naming crisis where, it's hard to refer to what it is that we do. And, depending on my audience, I kind of pick a different word for it. So I figured that I would let you know how I use the terms and present this as a way that people could use the terms. Of course, it may be completely different than what other people are saying. So personally, I use the terms treasure hunt or hunt to encompass all of the things that meet that one broad criteria that I mentioned. And then among those, I break it into things that I call games and things that I call puzzle hunts. So the games are sort of the solve a puzzle and move around and you're out in the wild doing stuff. And the puzzle hunt is something that is in a fixed location. So I'm going to get more into these. And then within a game, I sort of have broken it into categories they're in these categories not just because they vary on time, but also because each of these sort of categories has a different feel to it when you play them. And so I'm going to talk about more of these as we go on. Okay, so first of all, overnight games. I think everybody knows the history. If we don't, it's right there. So typical elements of the overnight game. So something that's different than the other games is that there's often extensive pre-games, and I think a lot of you realize this. It's overnight, it's in vehicles, covering lots of distance. The puzzles are typically more advanced than in the other shorter games. one of the interesting things that so far, and I think Co-ed Astronomy is breaking this tradition, is that this is the only format of games where winners are not, or sometimes not named. In pretty much all the other categories, they have been. And that's kind of interesting because I'm not sure what it is about this particular style that lends itself to that, but something that I've observed. And then the other thing that one of my favorite parts about it is that the overnight games tend to be more immersive, where they'll have a strong theme or a plot, and you sort of feel like you're being more taken away from reality. Okay, so day games. They actually share a lot of commonalities with the overnight games as I've broken them down. There's usually some form of hint distribution system, and typically, although most of our examples are Shintekis, which these guys run, typically the winners are named in all the examples that I came up with. So why might you want to play in one of these versus a regular game, or why might you want to run one? Well, the logistics are a lot easier for GC, although not hugely different. It's more a matter of the teams not being able to be as far spread out, and you don't have to worry about things being closed as much in the middle of the night when come up with stuff for people to do. It's also a great gateway between the short games and the overnight games for people that, yeah, I played in a short game that lasted 5 hours, and maybe I want to push that a little bit more and see where it is, and before they, take the dip of the 4 a.m. issue. and actually, people that I've talked to, a growing number of people actually prefer this format to the overnight game, and I wonder if that's some people. I wonder if that's actually part of our community is sort of aging together, and people are so anyways, the obvious example is Shinteki. Another one that was this similar format was Ian Tolis and Get on a Raft with Taft's game, The Apprentice Zorg, which was a couple years ago. All right, so mini games. So it turns out there are more mini games than all the others combined these days. The big difference here is that the games that are less than, say, 8 hours or so are almost always on foot. They're on a short area, and it's probably because the distances between clues are a lot shorter, and they don't want to spend as much time in the transitions. The puzzles are typically easier. These are sort of like games that newbies can come into and sort of get a feel for it. There's minimal pregame. It's sort of low overhead, just show up and play sort of thing. Although you have to sign up in advance because they fill crazy fast, as you guys all know, I think. There's also sometimes multiple divisions, so that way it sort of caters to the fact that there's newbies can play and the veterans can play, and it's not that there's this huge disparity when that happens. And again, winners named, most likely, and I think part of that might be that the Bang community is sort of based on this model, and it was for a long time where Bangs were basically the winner would have to run the next one, and in the most recent Bang, there was no one asked to run the next one, and there hasn't been one for a year, and I don't think there's a coincidence there. So benefits. If you haven't run a game, this is probably the place to start. You can learn all about like what it takes to try things, and all about the logistics, about taking signups and hosting stuff, and yeah. And it's also, like I mentioned before, this is the place to try out brand new ideas without the overhead of waiting for a year of planning to do it, or something like that. So I have some examples of these. I'm not going to get too much into these, or I could drone on forever. But the obvious one is the Bangs. That was started by David Ollier in 2002 after he played in an overnight game and thought it would be really great to capture the nighttime aspect of the game without all the extra planning involved. And so they've sort of gotten harder over the years as the winners were running the next ones, and so consequently it sort of made them harder. But I think that's not how it needs to be, and so if there are easier events, that's good too, because we need to get more people involved. Shout out to Co-ed Astronomy, who are running a short event next month. And yeah, the other thing that you might notice about mini games is that this seems to be the sweet spot for people that do hunts for profit. And so there's a ton of here. Shout out to Alexandra for the Java. Dave and Greg were doing Park Challenge for a while, though there hasn't been one for a while. Is that pretty much dead, or what? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So those were in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. Raven Chase is actually an interesting one. So this is a company that you guys might not be familiar with. They're based on the East Coast, and this basically started from one guy who ran treasure hunts for his family and thought it would be fun to do it for a larger group. And it turns out that they've actually grown a lot, and now they're running hunts all over sort of places that are east of the Mississippi, and then they also have a thing in Hawaii. But I think that one of the things about their hunt that is a little bit lacking is that they don't have the thing that I was talking about that's great about our community, where we've got all these different people sort of running hunts and injecting their own ideas into it. They've got like the same group of people running the hunts over and over again without any sort of cross-pollination. I think they're improving that aspect, and they're getting more people involved. But you know, for an activity that's been going on as long as, you know, we've existed for about the same amount of time, I think that our community has grown a lot more through the evolution that I'm talking about. So we're in good shape there. Urban Challenge was one where it was really heavy on the physical activity, so much so that many of the teams would actually have one set of people who would be at home solving the puzzles, and the people that are out on the course were just running around waiting for the answers to be delivered to them. And they had a really large prize, and they went about 4 years, and I think they ran out of money and sort of dropped off the map. So there's another company called High Trek Adventures that is pretty similar to them that is going on now. I don't know a whole lot about them, but I know that Justin and Charlie Graham, who were big into the Urban Challenge, have been playing this new one. And then there was a promotion last year for the National Treasure Book of Secrets, and so this was sort of a one-off activity that some of the teams from the Bay Area played. And it was cool because the two teams that won the semis in the Bay Area went to New York in the finals, which had 2 other cities involved, and our 2 teams finished in the top 2 spots, so that was pretty cool. Huh? Who was it? So the team that won was Nick Baxter and some sort of Burninator related people. I think they weren't the core Burninators team. And then the second place team was my team with Charlie Graham and 2 other Blood and Bones people. Oh, wow. Yeah. All right. So that was all about the games. Now a little bit about puzzle hunts. The typical thing about a puzzle hunt is that you've got one team and you're in a conference room, and it's usually for 2 or 3 days. And it's a completely different format, not only because you're not moving around, but also because there's lots of puzzles released all at once. You're not all on the same, not everyone on the same team is working on the same puzzle at the same time. There's sort of this parallel solving. You make heavy use of meta puzzles, which is you solve a bunch of puzzles, and then the answers to those puzzles sort of come together to create the answer to the meta puzzle, and then you advance like that. And sometimes there's a meta in the final thing. One thing that I really like about them is that they have these real-time internet-based scoring applications that the sort of move around type puzzle hunts don't really lend themselves very well to. But this is something that, I don't know, I know not everybody likes it, but I like it. And I have the microphone.
Although I would say the 2 major, the mystery hunt versus the puzzle hunt.
Yeah.
The puzzle hunt is one where they're really into having this scoring sort of system.
Right.
And the mystery hunt doesn't do that at all. You have no idea where you stand. So
that's true.
2 philosophical differences.
That is true. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
So it was more of a comment. The comment was that, actually I have another slide with that, so I'll discuss that when I get there. So because of the format, there's also types of puzzles that work in this format that you just can't do anywhere else. And these are puzzles that require lots of like internet interaction, or puzzles that take a really long time, because you can do it with a really large team where you're just dedicating a couple people on the team to making progress on that. And the other thing that's kept these types of hunts alive is that the winners are named and they're responsible for the next hunt. And this has kept them alive for years and hasn't faltered quite yet. So the 2 main examples that John was actually alluding to are the MIT Mystery Hunt, which happens once a year at MIT, and the Microsoft Puzzle Hunt, which happens once or now twice a year at the Microsoft headquarters. One big difference is that the Microsoft Puzzle Hunt has been having more of this real-time scoring stuff, and you always sort of know where you stand. The MIT Mystery Hunt, actually, you don't really know where you are relative to other teams, but as soon as one team finishes, the game is over. And so it's kind of like, you work really hard, and then all of a sudden at some point you stop in the middle of what you're doing and go, okay, well, there's we're done. Yeah, and then there was one Google puzzle hunt which was modeled very closely after the Microsoft puzzle hunt, and I don't know for sure if the second one is happening or not, but I'm hopeful. Okay, so I'm now kind of slicing in a different direction, and there's a couple games that I think sort of go together, and these are what I'm calling collaborative games, and that's where the element of the game that I think is most noteworthy is that rather than the GC putting together all the puzzles and running the games, the puzzles actually come from the people who are participating. So the first one is BATH, which stands for Bay Area Treasure Hunt, and this was the brainchild of Alexandra, who's in the back, and she's recruited some help from other people, including myself and Greg in the past, and Jesse.
And the first one is BATH GP, which is for Girl Power.
All right, and Deanne. Yeah, and so that's where the teams submit the puzzles, and then the GC acts as sort of like the mastermind of arranging them, and sometimes even adding a bit of their own content. Iron Puzzler, which unfortunately I have not played in, but I've heard great things from everyone who has played in them, and that was from Greg DeBeer right here in the front. And the basic concept there is it's a 2-day event. On Saturday, teams are given some constraints where they have to make puzzles that satisfy those constraints. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. And then on Sunday, you get together with all the teams who have made puzzles and you solve them together, and then there's some scoring system that involves on how fun the puzzles are and how many people solve them and that sort of thing. And good time is had by all. Is that about right? Yep. All right. Okay, so what about longer than the game? So this is going in the completely different direction. The only one I know of is the Raven Chase Great America Treasure Hunt. And so this is run by the company that I mentioned earlier. The first event that they had was last year. It started in Washington, D.C. and went to New Orleans, and it took 7 days. It was a lot of fun, and then it was a week-long hunt. And there was traveling around and all that stuff. And it turns out that it took us a little while to get used to the style of their hunts, but ultimately I think we got the hang of it and pulled out the win for the West Coast, so that was kind of cool. And Chris Rote actually in the back was part of the team. We were the co-captains, and I think we're going to do it again next year. And until there's someone else that wants to run a week-long game, this is the only show in town for that kind of thing. So, anyways. Anyone? So their format was basically that there was a bunch of mini games on consecutive days where we would go to a city, we'd have a mini game there, and then once we were sort of done there, they'd stop our time and we'd drive to the next city. And sometimes they'd do 2 cities in one day where we'd have a mini game and then a drive and then a mini game, and some days where they only had one city. And there were some days where, actually there was one day where there's no puzzling. That day we got to go rafting that day. So.
Now, when you say mini games, were they sometimes on foot, or were they still?
They were actually, yeah, that's a good question. So most of them were on foot, but I think 1 or 2 of them were in cars. But they were all within like one sort of metropolitan area. Okay, so what else is out there? So there's lots of other stuff I could drone on about. I haven't actually participated in a lot of these things, but let's see, how are we doing on time? Yeah. You guys can read these. If you want to ask me about any of these, feel free. And I may or may not know that much about them. But these are things that I didn't cover. All right. So what's the point? So my take-home messages are, if you aren't playing in some of these games, then you should. Because there are things to do when we're in between other games. And it's also a great place to invite new people that you think might be interested. So rather than, you can tell someone to just form your own team, but you could also say, hey, this is a great time in a short game for you to take on an extra person because that person might really like it, and then form their own team, and then the community grows and everybody wins. And then if you're not ready to run a longer game, or you're just getting started, then run a bang and try it out, and people will love you. And if you run a bang, consider running something longer. And then I'll move on to don't be afraid to try out new stuff. So I think that's part of what we need to use these games is if you run a short game, think of something new, like Greg did, for instance, and see how people like it. And that's a great way because other people that play it might incorporate that, and that's how we sort of keep the community fresh and we get new ideas and evolve and so forth. So that's it. Questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to offer one addition, and I'll let Brent talk about it, because it's something that predates almost everybody in this room, including me. But that's a green game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so actually I can talk about that a little bit. But because actually that is how our team was sort of formed. So I think the question is, what about a green game, by the way, for the camera. So I believe at some point Brent's team, 97, ran a game that basically took clues from previous games and ran a game exclusively for people who had never played before. And so there wasn't as much in terms of like having to come up with the clues. It was more just like running the event. And there were this got a bunch of new people involved. And actually our team was formed because one of the people who had played in that game, we were sort of discussing, life and fun things, and he mentioned that to us, and we followed up on it and said that sounds great, and so Blood and Bones came about that way. So it could be, get more people involved that way. So run a green game. That's another good possible way to do it.
So part of the reason I think that's important is, how many people in this room are students? Right? How many people in this room have lots and lots of time on their hands to put on a big event?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think in running this game, it's something that takes less time, but potentially introduces lots of new people to something. In particular, I think the survival of this community is going to be based on how many people we get on this campus and Berkeley and other places to be part of this, because we're all getting old. Yeah,
that's a really good point.
The way we approached it when we did it was that we cobbled together clues from our own previous games. And it was actually, the green was a theme in 3 ways. One, it was recycled. Another was, it was first-time players.
Why don't you just
Start over.
Yeah, come on.
So what we did was, when we put it together from our own games that we had done before. The green theme came up in 3 ways. It was recycled, it was for rookies only, so players who were green, and we had a running story through that was all about the color green, so we kind of wove that through. But the way we approached it was that we came to the existing community and we said, we're running this for people who've never played before. So we got all of the teams and the players to recommend friends of theirs, and we approached them as potential captains. And so we kind of branched it out from the existing community, and it was quite successful. We had a lot of teams, and they had a really good time because it was all proven clues and good classic locations. There's so many great locations that you'd be happy to go to every time you play, but it just doesn't work that way. So with this, we were able to reuse sites, reuse clues, get a lot of new people in. So it was very successful.
Cool. Thanks, Brent. Yeah. And thanks, John, for suggesting that topic. That's good. Anyone else? Yeah, Mark.
So for a long time, we were always getting a new game from like Stanford Dorm games, for instance. Does anyone know if that's still going and getting people?
The game is going until like just was again this year. So the one definitely is still going strong.
So the question for the camera was, are there still Stanford Dorm games going on to get more people involved? And Jan answered with, yes, it is. Is that a good paraphrase?
I can say that
we
scouted Stanford campus for a private Google event. When we were scouting the sites, we found clues for 2 different games.
Really? Wow. So. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Yeah. Go ahead.
Substantial pregame for certain games.
Yes. Oh, okay. So pregame. So for the overnight games in particular, there's often a pregame period, and so usually that starts with some form of application. So the application can be anything under the sun. Sometimes it's solving puzzles, sometimes it's constructing something, and then once the teams are chosen, then sometimes there's even more activity that leads up to the start of the game. So things that like maybe there's a website for the game that has hidden clues in it that might tell you what you need to bring, that sort of stuff.
So pregame is a qualifying round.
Well, I mean, you can kind of look at the application part as the qualifying round. Brent's got to say something here.
So pregame actually started when the game was just a Stanford thing on campus. And the way it works is it was called pregame week. So the week leading up, Monday through Friday, there would be one clue that was released each day. And it would be on campus, and you wouldn't know where it was. It might be posted on a statue somewhere. There was, chalked in White Plaza. It might be in the Daily. You'd have to look everywhere. Generally, what would happen is when you would solve a pre-clue, it would lead you to either a location or a piece of information. When you went to the location, you would tend to get a piece of information, and that information was usually something to bring with you that would be helpful during the game. It might be bring a sledgehammer, it might be bring, a laser, whatever it happened to be. There was one that I really enjoyed where we were sent off into the foothills, and we found a little bag of magnetic powder. And if you didn't solve the pre-clue and get it beforehand, then at the beginning of the game, they basically said, anyone who doesn't have this, here you go, and they had to solve a puzzle right then to get it. So there was a little head start for the teams who had done it during the week. So that's kind of where it all started. It's to the point now where people are so prepared for games that it's kind of hard to come up with something that they're not going to bring already. And if it is, it's so esoteric that you pretty much just have to tell them. So the pregame has kind of changed its usefulness or its purpose. But I think for the most part, it's just a chance for people to get kind of fired up to play. So
cool. Thanks. Yeah, Alexandra.
You've probably all noticed that there's like a huge, I don't want to use a word with charge on it, like infiltration of Seattle teams coming down to the Bay Area. And while this banding is exploding, you guys have 41 teams signed up, 18 on the wait list. And the Seattle teams will come down for all but the shortest games. They'll come down for Kentucky. They'll fly down from Seattle. Is there any way we can encourage them to put on games in Seattle so they can fly up there?
So the controversial question was, there's a larger number of Seattle teams that are coming down for the Shintekis and longer games. But they don't usually come down for the shorter games. Is there a way that we can encourage them to run more longer games so that we can go up there for their games as well? And I think John would like to answer.
So they ran this Moon Curses event.
Here.
Some of them are probably going to be watching this. So.
That's right.
They ran the Moon Curses event a few years ago, and for good or bad, the way that they did it is they took many, if not all of the people who were very experienced, they had an 11-person game control or something, from all the teams that played, and they were the ones who put that on. And so, on one hand, that made a totally amazing event. On the other hand, none of those people feel like, oh, I want to go run the next one because I just ran the last one. And so the number of experienced people up there that could run a game that didn't run the last game is very small.
Yeah, good point.
And if it's just that you're sick of seeing the Seattle people down here, we're going to run a Kentucky up there sometime so they don't have to come down here.
Brent has gone on record to run a Shintekki in Seattle.
The longer overnight games, what we traditionally call the Stanford game, really doesn't scale up very well. So if there's only room for 20 teams, and 9 of them are from Seattle, that means that local teams can't play.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, we run Kentucky consecutive weekends, but running an overnight game on consecutive weekends would be a nightmare.
Yeah. Miscellaneous discussion about the merits of Seattle. All right.
Slogging events, actually, they contacted us about running our game with our clues in Seattle at the same weekend.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So there's been talk about running a game in Seattle that's the same as the Bay Area game on the same weekend.
That's what Rico and Bob did. They ran a game at Harvey Mudd and Rose Holman at the same time. The teams actually competed. They started at the same exact time.
Yes.
I'll just throw out there that one thing that I'm hoping to do at some point is to run simultaneous iron puzzlers as well in San Francisco, in Seattle, or Boston, or wherever, and then trade puzzles so that the Seattle puzzles come down to the Bay Area and the Bay Area puzzles go up to Seattle, and then everyone gets a chance to play in 2 games. An iron puzzler and a new game based on puzzles that have sort of been vetted, and we can tweak puzzles after the event based on feedback that we get at the event. So if anybody watching this wants to contact me, check out the Iron Puzzler website, and we can coordinate.
Cool. All right, anybody else? Shall we move on to our, Acorn.
People ask me how to find out about the game, like if they want to play. And I don't actually know, because when I play, somebody just comes and tells me about it. I don't really pay much attention, so I don't really know how you're supposed to I'm not sure what to tell people.
Okay, so I think that, I mean, there's a lot of people that, oh, I'm sorry. The question is, what do we tell someone who wants to find out more about the game, but they don't really have, man, this is going to be great. They don't really have a good way to find out about it. So I think there's a couple answers to that. One is that there are some good mailing lists that you can refer them to. So for the shorter variety of games, I think the Bay Bang list pretty much covers most of the short games in the area. The other is the game list, although I think you may need, I don't know how that's being managed these days, but you might need a reference to get on there. Yeah.
It tends to be hard to get approved as a new member.
Yeah. So scratch that from the record. And then the other possibility is that I think that there's a lot of us that have sort of like team websites that have links to games that are coming up and stuff like that.
Read Curtis's blog.
Curtis's blog, yeah.
Curtis's calendar, he has a calendar of events.
Yeah.
United States events.
Yep. And I'll be publicizing this. My site has them. Most of the ones I'm playing in, anyways. I guess I could try to be a little broader. Or maybe there's no difference. I don't know. Anyone else? All right, I'm wrapping up. Okay, who's next? Jan? All right.